1,000 women kneel on a marble cliff, a mile above a deadly sea of mist. Above them, a crackling energy dome. Below, certain deaths, the king's decree, conceived in 60 days, or die, 12 years, 0 heirs. This isn't her. Harem, it's a lottery of death. But one girl, she just woke up with a madon. So, and only one thought, wrong. Hyde survived.
He was tall, rigid, and unbearably still, the kind of stillness that reminded you of a shield sword waiting for blood. He hadn't spoken since the edict was read. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he shattered the silence. 2 guards stepped forward and dragged a girl from the ranks.
Please, I don't want to die. I'll get pregnant next month, I swear, please!
Her screams and frantic pleas echoed violently against the stone walls, her voice cut off with a sudden sickening thud, signaling the abrupt end of her fragile life. Before the coppery scent of her blood could even settle in the air, I stepped out of line and into the open.
I volunteer.
3 weeks ago, I'd cut my hair, bound my chest, and walked into the Royal Academy tournament as a male scholar.
I am Lyron of the Outer Provinces.
Yes, that's quite clear, thank you.
Named Lyron of the Outer Provinces. I had won. The prize was a court appointment. Quiet.
Useful. Safe.
Then the edict came down. Then someone, Celia Vane, King's maid, smiling all the while, pulled the pin from my collar and let the binding fall.
You lied to who you are, and now you wish to bear the king's heir.
People gasped, but the king didn't stir. Now I stood in a borrowed silk gown 2 sizes too long, the hem damp from the courtyard fountain they'd dragged me through, calculating whether I could make the cliffs before the guards reached me. I could not. He did not hurry. He never hurried. He descended the 7 steps of the dais one at a time, drawing a thin silver blade from the rest at his hip as he came. I held my chin up. I did not look at the floor. My mother had taught me that, back when I still had a mother and a world and a name nobody was trying to kill. He stopped a sword's length from me. The blade lifted. Cold metal kissed the soft hollow under my jaw. The hall held its breath.
30 seconds.
His voice was low, granite under velvet.
Explain why you volunteered.
I smiled. I had no idea what I was going to say. I survived the night. That is the simplest way to say it, so I will say it that way. At dawn, I sat on the cold, polished floor of the outer corridor, holding my sandals in my lap because I did not trust my hands to put them back on. The sun was coming up over the cliffs. The light was very pink. Very kind, very stupid. Somewhere behind a carved screen, a servant was pretending not to watch me. I had talked my way out of a blade at my throat. I had talked my way into a bed I did not want. I had talked, and at some point in the dark hours I had stopped talking, and the king had stopped listening, and the world had become a thing that happened to a body that used to be mine. I was alive. I was counting that as a win.
Hello user. Onboarding. Initiated. Quantum Fertility AI Implant. Model 7B. Activated by qualifying event. Please remain calm. Smiling is optional but encouraged. I am a relic from your original dimension. Embedded at the cellular level. I was dormant. You triggered me. Welcome to the program.
What program?
My mission is simple. Help you conceive and safely deliver one healthy child. Completion reward. Full extraction and return to your home dimension.
I sat very still on the floor. A child and home. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. I made them stop.
CD.
Oh, a nickname recording. How long stabilization mode is now active? Estimated delivery window 7 planetary months.
7 months of pretending to be a royal consort in a court where Celia Vane was already sharpening something for me. 7 months of carrying a king's child to win a ticket out of a world that had eaten my old life whole. I laughed once. It came out wrong. The servant behind the screen flinched.
Fine. Sure. Let's do it.
I stood up. My legs held good legs, loyal legs.
One additional note. User.
What?
Multiples detected.
I missed the next step entirely and caught myself on the wall.
I'm sorry, what did you just say?
Multiples. Final count pending. Have a wonderful morning.
The corridor went silent. The pink dawn kept being pink somewhere on the far side of the citadel. A bell rang for the morning hour. I stared at my own hand, pressed flat against the cold marble wall, and understood very calmly that my odds had just changed again.
2 months later, they brought us into the great hall in chains of silk. Not real chains. The court did not need real chains. The silk was enough. White cord looped twice around each wrist, a ribbon's length apart, just long enough to remind you that you could not run.
Master Healer Corvin waited at the long jade table. Old, stooped, eyes like cold water. He did not enjoy this part of his work. You could tell by the way he did not look up. One by one, the consorts went forward. One by one, Corvick placed his thin silver instrument over each woman's belly. One by one, the instrument hummed a flat, indifferent tone. The list was the execution list. By the 30th name, the women in line had stopped pretending to breathe quietly. By the 50th, one of them collapsed and was carried out. By the 100th, Celia Vane was openly smiling. She stood by the column nearest the desk in pale gold silk, arms folded, watching like someone watching a play she had already read. When my number was called, she turned her head a fraction to follow me. Just a fraction. Enough. I walked to the jade table. Corvin did not look up. He lifted the instrument. He placed it just below my ribs. The instrument did not have a flat tone. It chimed. Then it chimed again. Then it made a sound I had never heard it make. A soft, escalating triple note, and Corvin's hand jerked away from my body as if the metal had burned him. The hall went quiet in a way I had not believed a room could go quiet.
Stand, please.
His voice was thin. He had said please. I had not heard him say please to anyone all morning. He passed the instrument over me a second time, slowly. His other hand came up to brace the first. His knuckles had gone the color of bone.
Again. Forgive me. Again.
A third pass. A fourth. The instrument kept chiming, like a bell announcing something, like a kettle that did not know how to stop. Celia's smile slipped. Not by much, by exactly enough. Corvin finally looked up. He looked at me. He looked through me. He looked at the king's empty throne at the far end of the hall. He looked back at me.
Your Grace.
Yes. A breath went through the hall. Not a cheer. Not yet. Confusion. Disbelief.
You are with... The reading is not possible.
A herald stepped forward, pen raised. Corvin waved him back so violently the pen flew out of the man's hand and skittered across the jade.
No writing. Not yet. Not until the king.
He sat down on the bench behind him without seeming to notice he was sitting. His face was the color of paper that had been left in the rain. I looked across the hall at Celia. Her hand was at her throat. For the first time since I had met her, she looked like a woman who had just understood she was losing. They cleared the hall. It took the heralds 9 minutes to move 1,000 women out of a room that size, and I counted every one of them, because counting was the only thing my brain was willing to do. When the doors closed, only 4 of us remained. Corvin, 2 senior court physicians he trusted, and me. They scanned me again, with a different instrument, with a 4th borrowed from the observatory and not strictly designed for this kind of work. Every reading came back the same. 5 heartbeats, 5 small, stubborn, distinct pulses, layered over my own like a chord struck on a harp.
Apologies for the lay in confirmation, user.
CD.
Final count 5 quintuplets.
When you said multiples, I assumed 2.
An understandable error on your part.
The side door opened. King Arius walked in alone. He had not bothered with the formal robes. Black tunic, sword, hair still slightly damp from the morning training yard. He stopped 2 paces from the table, looked at Corvin, and waited. Corvin lifted the scan plate with both hands like it was an artifact from a temple.
5 heartbeats, 5. Confirmed by 3 instruments and 4 physicians. The consort Lyra is carrying 5 children.
A silence. And then the king of Aethon, who had not laughed in front of his court for 9 years, laughed. It was quiet. Almost private. A single low sound that started somewhere in his chest and surprised him on the way out. He turned his face away from us as if to hide it, and then he turned back, and his eyes had changed.
Bring her.
I was already there.
I stepped forward. He looked at me. There was no preamble. There never was, with him.
You are carrying 5.
I opened my mouth. I closed it. I opened it again.
5 what exactly? 5 children?
Yes.
The floor did a polite tilt. I caught the edge of the jade table with both hands. Corvin made a small, alarmed sound and reached for me. Arius reached faster. His hand closed around my elbow. Warm. Steady. Absurdly gentle for a man who had held a blade to my throat 8 weeks ago.
Sit.
I'm sitting.
You are standing.
I'm about to be sitting.
He guided me down onto the bench. He did not let go of my elbow. Across the room, through the partly open side door, I caught a flash of pale gold silk in the corridor. Celia Vane, white-faced, listening. She met my eyes through the doorway. She did not smile this time. Arius laughed again, even quieter than the first time. Just for me, I realized. Just inside the small circle of his shoulder and mine. Outside in the hall, the heralds were already whispering. By nightfall, the city would know. By morning, the whole continent would know. Nobody in the court had ever heard that sound from him before. Nobody knew what it meant. I was not entirely sure I did either. The consort elevation ceremony began at the third bell. I wore a robe so heavily embroidered I could feel each thread of gold weighing on my shoulders. My belly had begun to show, modestly, in a way the court tailors had pretended very hard not to notice. The Hall of Thrones was packed. Senior councillors in deep blue, junior councillors in slatum. The High Council benches full for the first time in a season. She had been perfect for 2 weeks. That was how I knew something was coming. Arius sat on the black glass throne. He did not look at me directly. He never did during ceremony.
Lyra.
But every time the herald called my name, his right hand tightened a 1/4 inch on the carved armrest. I had started noticing things like that. The herald reached the third invitation. The senior consort title was about to be spoken aloud.
The great doors slammed open. Aldrich the Sea walked in. Of course he had timed it.
Hold the ceremony.
A councillor on the front bend actually gasped, out loud, like a child at a play. Arius did not move. He did not stand. He did not speak. He simply looked.
Your Majesty, honoured council, I come with the reading of the stars.
He swept into the centre of the floor. He turned to address the council as much as the throne.
For 9 nights, my network has tracked an anomaly in the southern arc, a shadow, a pulse not native to this sky. We have triangulated. The consort, it's Lyra. Whatever quickens in her is not blessed. It is read by the heavens as a wound. I name her by the authority of the Star Observatory and the Codeconce Veil, the Cursed of Aethon.
I genuinely wanted to throw something at him.
I did not look at Aldrich. I looked at Celia. She was holding very still. The kind of still you hold when you already know the next line in the play. The kind of still you hold when you have practiced this scene in a mirror. She was not even pretending to be surprised. The hall did not gasp this time. The hall went silent. The kind of silent that comes after a struck bell, when the note has died but the air still remembers it. Arius's hand closed all the way around the armrest, and Celia Vane, in the second row, finally smiled. I asked for the floor. I did not ask politely. I had stopped doing polite at the word cursed. Arius granted it with a single tilt of his chin. The councillors shifted on their benches. I walked to the center of the Hall of Thrones, 6 months and 5 children heavy, and I planted my feet on the marble beside Aldrich's little scroll. May I
Speak.
I did not look at Aldrich. I looked at the council.
9 nights. The seer says his network tracked the anomaly for 9 nights. 9.
I let that sit. I have been with child for 4 months. If the heavens were screaming, they took their time picking up the phone. 2 councillors near the back exchanged a glance. Good. The southern arc he names is the same arc the observatory reported clear 3 weeks ago in the quarterly star log. I read the log. It's a public document. Anyone in this room can pull it.
A child does not read star logs.
A consort does. A small, ugly laugh moved through the junior benches. Aldrich's jaw tightened by exactly 1 degree.
Honored council, look at the timing. The elevation ceremony, mid-invocation, doors flung open. A scroll prepared in advance with seal cooled. I can see the resin from here. It's set hard. That's a full day at minimum.
This is not a vision. This is a performance.
I turned, finally, to Aldrich.
And a poorly rehearsed one.
He did not answer me. He smiled instead. That was almost worse. I turned back to the council.
I will not stand here and let a man with a fresh haircut and a week-old scroll call my children a wound.
So I propose a covenant wager of my own. The hall sharpened. Witness me. If my children are born healthy, and the continent of Aethon stands unharmed on the day of their first breath, the seer Aldrich forfeits his title, his staff, his network, and his seat on the Observatory Council. Permanently. Aldrich's smile twitched.
If I am wrong, if the stars are right and my body brings ruin, I accept his terms, whatever they are, in full.
Your Majesty.
Arius had not moved through any of it. His eyes were on me, only me.
Witnessed.
3 councillors stood. The seal-bearer brought the bronze plate. The covenant was struck Aldrich's mark, my mark, the king's seal pressed last and hardest into the soft red wax. It was done. The hall began, slowly, to breathe again. Aldrich bowed, deep, theatrical. As he straightened, his eyes met mine, and the smile he had been holding finally bloomed into the thing it had wanted to be all along. He already had a plan. I had known that walking in. I knew it twice as hard walking out. I turned for the side door. My ladies fell in behind me. I made it 3 paces before I caught the motion in my peripheral vision. Aldrich crossing toward the western arch, robes whispering on marble, and Celia Vane stepping smoothly into his path, falling in beside him, her hand settling on his sleeve as naturally as a bird landing on a branch she had built. She leaned in. She said something I could not hear. He laughed. I made a note of that laugh. I filed it in the same drawer as Celia's 2 still shoulders and the cooled wax on a fresh scroll.
User, your heart rate is elevated. Would you like a calming suggestion?
CD. I would like a list of every visitor Celia Vane has received in the last 60 days.
Compiling.
I walked out of the Hall of Thrones with my hand under my belly and my mind already 3 moves ahead.